Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of my podcast, Refining Rhetoric. I'm Robert Bortons, your host. Today's episode includes an interview with Yvette Hampton and discusses her documentary on homeschooling entitled Schoolhouse Rocked. And after that, I'll do a brief recap and unpack a few tools of learning, as well as talk about energy. And finally, Will McCreary will dive into the history of Ethereum. So let's get started.
Classical Conversation Studios presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Welcome back to another episode of Refining Rhetoric. Today, my guest is Yvette Hampton, host of the 2021 documentary Schoolhouse Rocked, the Homeschool Revolution. The film follows Yvette as she travels around the country with her family to interview homeschool parents and leaders in the home education movement. Yvette, thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So what is the Schoolhouse Rocked documentary for those who haven't heard about it before?
Yeah, well, hopefully by this time, most people have heard about it. It's been really exciting to just see how it's rippling throughout the homeschool community right now. And it is a feature-length documentary that our family made. It's called Schoolhouse Rocked, the Homeschool Revolution, as you said. And it's a documentary that really follows our family parallel to Heidi St. John and the St. John family, kind of tells our stories of homeschooling. But that's actually not the whole purpose of the documentary. Really, the purpose of the documentary is to debunk all of the misconceptions and negative stereotypes that people have about home education, because the reason that most parents don't want to homeschool is because they simply don't understand it. And we were on that side many years ago. We were going into, we're in our 11th year of homeschooling. And so about 12 years ago, we went to our first homeschool convention, completely blind really to what homeschooling even was. And we said we would never, ever, ever, ever homeschool because we really did not understand what homeschooling was. And so as the Lord called us and started changing our family and really moving through mine and Garrett's hearts, we got really excited about home education and wanted to share that with people. And we were starting to see people ask questions and seeing the things that were going on in the public school system and oftentimes, sadly, in private schools as well. So we wanted to just share our hearts and just say, this is what home education is all about. And you can do this, and just offer the hope that comes with homeschooling. And so that's really what the documentary is about. Even though, the storyline follows our family in the St. John's, it's really to answer all of the questions that people have about homeschooling, all the doubts, all of the things that parents lay awake at night worrying about, that they can't do this. And so we offer hope, we offer answers. And so that's really, in a nutshell, what the documentary is.
That's awesome. And your husband worked in the film industry and you guys were in California beforehand.
Yes.
What really prompted you stepping out in a lot of faith, quite frankly, to bring this great film and spend 3 years on the road creating it? What prompted that?
Yeah. Well, it was kind of funny because we are from California. And so Garrett had worked in the Hollywood film industry for many years. And then he went on to teach film at a private school in LA County. And as he was teaching, we were, I guess at that time, probably in our 5th year of homeschooling and still trying to kind of figure out what this was all about, but really excited about it. And it was the 2015-2016 school year. It was, I think, about sometime around April of 2016. We were sitting in church one day, and it was so funny because we had our church bulletin. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the church service, I got this bright idea that we should sell our house and all of our stuff and load up in an RV and go travel the country and figure out where home would be. So I wrote that on the church bulletin and I passed it to Garrett in church. And he looked at me and he was like, "What? We can't sell our house and all of our stuff and go travel. What are you talking about?" And so after church, he was like, "Yeah, that's not even practical. We can't do that." And I'm like, "Okay, well, whatever." I don't even know where that idea came from. Fast forward a couple of months later, the Lord put it on Garrett's heart to film this documentary. And at the same time, put it on his heart to sell our house, sell all of our stuff, load up in an RV, and go travel the country. And so it was really neat to see how the Lord had prepared my heart beforehand and then put it on Garrett's heart to combine the two of filming the documentary and traveling. And so he came to me one morning and he just said, "I don't know," because we hadn't talked about this at all. And he said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but I think we should sell our house and all of our stuff and load up in an RV and travel the country and make a documentary. Without hesitation, I said, yes, I think we should do that. And so it was something that the Lord called us to. And we were simply willing to say yes. We knew that God had a good plan in all of this, had no idea how it was going to pan out, but we knew that if the Lord was calling us to do this, he would orchestrate
Right.
all of our steps. And he did that so beautifully. And so it was a really fun adventure. And ironically, Garrett is the one who the Lord put the documentary on his heart first. With me, it was the leaving California and moving and selling all of our stuff, which would have been the harder sell for me because California is home. And that was my comfort zone. And that was where, our family, friends, our church, our homeschool community, our CC community, who I love dearly. I mean, they were our family. And so we were walking away from all of that. And that was really scary for me, but the Lord had prepared my heart first for it. And so that's what we did. We said yes. And the Lord started to open every door. And it wasn't easy, but there was no mistaking that this was what the Lord was calling our family to do.
That's awesome. So tell me about homeschooling your daughters in an RV as you guys traveled around the U.S. and did they get involved in the production and how did all that work for you?
Yeah, and that's a funny question because we have the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast now, which I host, and we're in the process of doing this homeschool survival series where we're talking about all the different styles of teaching, classical, Charlotte Mason, unit studies, all those things. And I'm like, we're kind of eclectic. We did CC for many years in California, but when we left, we couldn't, though we still continued to use a lot of the stuff, we sang our timeline song and used tons of our foundations resources that we had.
Yeah.
But because we were not able to be settled anywhere, we couldn't be part of a community. So we went from being classical to being very eclectic in our homeschooling. And it was really neat because our girls now have been to somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 states. And instead of just drawing the map on a paper, they've driven much of the map. And it's been so neat to just see God's creation as we've driven. And so, we'll go places and then we get to see it in person and not read about it in a book. And so that part has been really neat of just homeschooling in real life, but not just seeing God's creation in different monuments and history, the history of our country, but our girls really experiencing the making of this movie because they've been a huge part of filming this documentary. I mean, literally, like they would be the cameraman sometimes because we didn't have anyone else to film, and they would be the photographer, and they would set up craft services. And it was really funny. As a matter of fact, I remember when we were filming with Sam Sorbo, we had gone to this home that they were staying in. Kevin was filming a movie. And so we were at their rental, like Airbnb, wherever production had put them up. And that's where we set up to film with Sam. And so my girls were in charge of all the snacks and stuff. And so they'd have snacks and water and drinks and all those fun things. And then in walks Kevin Sorbo, and Brooklyn at the time, I guess she was probably 12. I think she had just turned 12, but she had seen him in several movies. And I mean, her eyes got so big and she's like, it's Kevin Sorbo. Would you like a snack? And so, so they did craft services. They did all kinds of fun things, and they were just part of the experience of this real life adventure that our family was on. And so, the academic part, I mean, that was the easier part. We would do school when we were settled and parked somewhere and could get in a couple of math lessons. But overall, they just experienced a whole different way of life and of learning. And it has been a true adventure for them. Hard in a lot of ways because they were apart from their friends and family, but they've gotten to experience things that most people don't ever get to experience in their lifetime.
Yeah, I know those experiences will last a lifetime for them. And I know the academics, like you said, is sometimes the easy part, especially when we're doing life together and they're getting hands-on real-world experience, doing all sorts of different jobs, from film to hospitality. That's awesome. So you went and you interviewed some popular homeschool figures like Andrew Pudewa and Andrew Kern, which we hope to have on the podcast in the future, Mike Smith at HSLDA, Ken Ham, the Creation Museum, and Dr. Carol Swain, who will be on a show shortly after this one. But what were some common threads or ideas that you discovered during your interview with these leaders?
Yeah, this was really exciting because the difference between a documentary and a movie that's scripted is that a documentary is not scripted. And so, we even when we interviewed you at the CC headquarters, you ask questions, but you don't tell people what to say. They just say what they say. And it was really incredible as we were interviewing these different people. And I'm talking everyone from, Andrew Pudewa and Ken Ham to your typical homeschool mom, because we interviewed just your regular mom like myself, who's just in the thick of it right now. And as we were interviewing people, someone would say something. They would discuss some topic. And then maybe a month later or even a year later, we would interview someone else, and their answer would perfectly align with what several other people had said. And it was so cool because when you watch the movie, it's almost like a dance where it's so beautifully orchestrated and choreographed. And that was only by the Lord. I mean, we didn't do that intentionally. The Lord did that. And so Garrett and I would sometimes just look at each other afterwards and we'd be like, whoa, that is like, it fits perfectly with what someone else said. And so in the movie, you'll see, Ken Ham will say something, and then Heidi St. John will almost answer the question that he asked as if they're sitting in the same room having the same conversation. And so it was really neat just to see how the Lord really did orchestrate the storyline in the movie and the message that was to come across in this documentary. And it was really his message. I mean, it's his movie, not ours.
Mhm.
And so God was just so faithful to bring exactly the cast that he wanted to bring and just make it all work together.
That's awesome. So you didn't prep anybody, say, hey, we really need to get a soundbite on X point of view.
No. As a matter of fact, one of the tricks of making a documentary is you never give the questions ahead of time, because then people prepare their answers. They script their answers and then they try to deliver it as if it's, a scripted line. But yeah, no, it's just raw interviews of people just pouring their hearts out and sharing what the Lord puts on their hearts.
That's awesome. And I've watched the film and I really enjoyed it and just was amazed how everything came together, and just can attest that it just seemed like, this could have been scripted. I knew it wasn't, but just how the Lord orchestrated that is just so awesome to see his power and his love for us. What would be like one of the most startling or really unexpected things that you learned during the making of Schoolhouse Rocked?
The thing that for me, I think was unexpected was, maybe a couple things. One was, I think going into it, like I said, we were going into when we started filming and traveling, we were just going into our 6th year of homeschooling. And I thought I knew more about homeschooling than I actually did at the time. But it was really neat because the Lord showed us so much, and he has taught us so much about not just home education, but about family discipleship. And I think that's been a huge thing for Garrett and I, even though that's always been on the forefront of our minds. We were still learning, what that looked like and how that would play into our day-to-day teaching and bringing up of our girls, because it's so much more than just reading the Bible during family devotions each day. It is an all day, every day concerted effort to pour God's truth and God's word over the hearts of our kids, right? And always looking for opportunities, always being intentional about how and what we're teaching to our kids. And so as we filmed, it was like our eyes were just being opened more and more and more and more to what the Lord was teaching us through these people that we were interviewing, so that we could teach it to others through the documentary. And so that was a huge thing for me. But the other thing I think that was unexpected is I felt, as a homeschool mom coming into homeschooling, like I was very inadequate. I was very insecure about my ability to teach my kids, and not to raise them, but to teach them academically. I hated school growing up. And I mean, like, despised everything about school. I was raised in a Christian school pretty much my entire life, but I hated school. I really struggled academically. And so that was one of the reasons that we said we'd never homeschool our kids, was because I was like, well, I hated it the first time. Why would I want to do this again? And the Lord has shown me that even in my inadequacies, he is absolutely enough. And so as we were interviewing people, whether they were people like, Heidi, or just your typical mom, across the board, pretty much every single parent that we talk to feels like they're inadequate. Like they're not organized enough. They're not enough. They're not smart enough. They're not educated enough. Satan really likes to give us doubts. He likes to make us doubt our ability to teach our kids and to raise our kids effectively for the Lord. And so what we really started focusing on was Matthew 6:33, which says, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you.
Mm.
And so we started to learn, seek him first. Like that's where it starts. It doesn't start with the timeline. It starts with Jesus. Like you seek God first, and he's going to fill in all of the gaps. And there's going to be a ton of gaps, but it's okay, because even kids who come out of any school in the world, they're going to have gaps. So just trusting that the Lord is going to give us what we need in order to do what he's called us to do with raising our kids. And then in the end, he gets all the glory for it. We don't get to come back and say, look at what an amazing teacher I am, and look what an amazing mom I am. We get to say, look at what the Lord did, because we were willing to just say yes and be obedient to his call.
I love that. And one of the things that we're doing in this podcast is practicing the 15 tools of learning that we teach in classical conversations, just because there's always going to be gaps, and who knows what technological revolution there'll be in the next 5 years. And, there'll be new gaps created or new things to learn. And so, we believe that if you give kids that excitement and give them those tools of learning, they're going to be able to take on whatever God gives them. If God calls them to an RV lifestyle for a few years and create this documentary, then they'll be able to handle it just like you were able to.
Yes.
What, obviously we've just, we're in COVID, maybe we're through COVID now, I'm not sure what everyone thinks about that, but what have you seen in America's attitude towards the public school system, and how families will look at homeschooling in the near future compared to maybe how they have in the past?
COVID has been one of the most interesting things to see, and it actually plays a huge part in getting this movie out, because we thought this movie would be out in 2019, 2020, somewhere around there. And we could not understand why the Lord kept delaying the release of this film. And we kept trusting him to saying, okay, Lord, in your perfect time, in your perfect time. And no one could ever in a million years have imagined what COVID, that COVID would even happen and what it would do to our nation. And though there have been a lot of really terrible things that have come as a result of COVID, I think one of the greatest blessings is that for the first time, I think ever in our nation, parents are finally waking up. They're starting to see firsthand what's going on in the public school system. Education is never, ever neutral, ever. It's always about indoctrination. Whether your kids are being indoctrinated in the public school or if they're being indoctrinated at home, there is indoctrination. I mean, the definition of indoctrination is a teaching of a doctrine, principle, or ideology, especially with one specific point of view. And so when you look at that, they're always being taught an ideology of something. And they're being taught by the person who is teaching them. Luke 6:40 says, a disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. And parents are finally starting to ask the question, wait a minute, who's teaching my kids and what exactly are they being taught? And I think for so long, parents have just turned their eyes and kind of stuck their head in the sand and pretended like the things that are happening in the public school system are not actually happening. And now with COVID, they've been forced to see what's happening. And not only are they seeing what's happening, but for the first time, many parents have realized that they can homeschool. They brought their kids home and they're like, oh, I actually like my kids. So many parents, I'm sure you've heard this before too, Robert, a lot of parents will say, oh, I could never imagine having my kids home with me all day. They would drive me crazy. And my answer to those parents is that's because you're not the one raising them. They're being raised by a school system that hates families, that is teaching them everything contrary to the word of God.
Right.
They're not teaching them that they were made in the image of a holy God, created on purpose and for a purpose. They're teaching them everything contrary to what a Christian parent should be teaching their kids. So of course you don't like your kids. Bring them home, you start raising them. And that's what we're seeing happen, is that a lot of parents are like, wow, I actually can do this. And I actually do like my kids. And that doesn't mean it's easy. But I think as parents start to see that, and as that ripple effect happens, more and more parents will start to see that they really can do this. They can homeschool their kids. And there are so many resources like CC who are there for them, who just say, you know what, you don't have to do it on your own. We'll help you through this journey, but you get to be in the driver's seat and you get to direct the learning of your kids. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Americans as a whole, their eyes have definitely been opened. And it will be interesting to see what happens in the next 5 years and the next 10 years, the next 15 years, and just how things change. But I will say really quickly on a side note to that, we have to continue to fight for our freedom, because as more and more kids are coming home from these schools, our government, of course, is wanting to tighten the reins. And they don't want this. They want to have control over our kids. And so parents have got to continue to fight. They have to start to fight if they haven't. But we have got to continue to fight for the freedom that we have to homeschool our kids.
Yeah, no, a lot of people don't realize that homeschooling was not legal in every state until the mid 90s or early 90s, I think 1993. So you take it for granted now. Yep. I know in our own state here in North Carolina, we have over 100,000 homeschoolers. I think about 10% of our population is homeschooling or not in government-run school systems. And so they're trying to figure out how to get their hands back on these students and their families and pull them back into the system. And we got to remind our elected officials that they work for us. Our students don't work for them. What were some of the things you learned that maybe you would tell parents now who said, oh, I'd love to homeschool, but I'm not qualified to teach my children? I mean, you've kind of alluded to that a little bit already today. But
yeah, well, I would say, what makes you think that the people who are who are schooling them in a traditional school are qualified to teach your kids? Because you, as a parent, you know your kids better than anyone. You love them more. You are more in tune with your kids and their quirks and their strengths and their weaknesses and their learning abilities and disabilities. Like, you know them better than anyone else. At least you should, if you're paying attention and if you're being intentional about your parenting. But no one loves your kids the way that a parent loves them. And so we have this idea that the professionals, those who have gone to teacher school for 4 years or 6 years or however long, and they have that stamp on that piece of paper that says you're a teacher, go, that they are somehow better equipped to teach our kids. And I love, Sam Sorbo talks about this in the movie. She's like, at what point do we give this up? I mean, we teach our kids to tie their shoes and we teach them all the things that they learn. And then all of a sudden, when they're 4 or 5 years old, we're like, okay, yep, all done. We're going to pass you on to the experts now. No one's an expert in your kids like you are. You are your kid's expert. And God has created it that way. And so I think we have to get rid of this idea that the professionals are doing it right and we're doing it wrong. And again, it goes back to just trusting that the Lord is going to equip us with everything that we need to teach our kids. And you know what? We're going to mess it up. I mess it up all the time. Every one of us does that. But it's okay. If we're being obedient to the Lord, He is going to bless our efforts and He is going to accomplish through us what He wants to accomplish through our kids. And it doesn't mean it's easy. It's really hard some days, but it's totally worth it because we only have such a short amount of time with our kids. And as you're seeing, I'm sure with your little ones, they grow up so fast. And it's shocking how quickly it goes. And so, take advantage of that time and don't pass them off to someone else for, 12,000 hours of their childhood. Take back the time you have with your kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I know, my oldest is 7. And I just think about my youngest who will be turning 2 soon. It's like when he's 7, she'll be 12.
Yeah,
and I'm like, oh. And I think about how fast it's gone just from the last 7 years. So I definitely agree with you there. And, my wife was a middle school teacher, and one of the things I just encouraged her was like, you're going to have to unlearn everything that they taught you because what they taught you was not correct way to teach. And so I know we hear that from a lot of our families here at Classical Conversations who maybe came out of the teaching world. And not that they didn't have things that they brought out that were beneficial to them, but that they've had to unlearn. Star Wars is one of my favorite movies. And I always remember Yoda talking to Luke, you must unlearn what you have learned in order to be able to advance. And I think a lot of, teachers who go into homeschooling have to do that. So
yeah, I'll pretend like I've seen Star Wars and know what you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, it's a pretty wholesome movie. So I think we can talk about it here.
I tried to watch one and I disliked it so much. And I said, never again will I watch another Star Wars movie, but that's okay. I know lots of people love it.
Yeah.
It's just not my thing.
Yeah, no worries. So, the Schoolhouse Rocked, is it just for homeschoolers to watch, or is it for people who aren't homeschooling? All of the above? Like, why should kind of each demographic watch it? If you're a dedicated homeschooler or someone who maybe don't even have kids.
Yeah. Yes. It's definitely a movie for everyone because I think that everyone needs to understand what education and what family discipleship can look like. And not that there's a perfect formula for it, but so many people, we did street interviews when we were filming the documentary. And so we would just talk to random people on the street who didn't, have homeschooling kids.
Those are the fun. I love those in the documentary. Those are my
They're so
favorite.
much fun. And just to get people's perspective of what homeschooling is and people's misconceptions about it, every time people are like, oh, but socialization, what about socialization? I'm like, seriously, are you still asking that question? But people still do ask that. And so I think that one of the greatest ways to get everyone on board to understand what homeschooling is for people to see the movie. And it was interesting as we were preparing for filming, when we were in pre-production, we had kind of our list of demographics and people that were our target audience. And of course, the first one would be people who were not yet homeschooling, but asking all the questions about it. The second one would be people who are homeschooling, because we wanted to validate those families. And it does that. We wanted to say, you're doing such a great job and you're doing the right thing for your family. And here are all the reasons why, and here's all the proof. And then there's the grandparents who still till this day, oftentimes grandparents are like, but why would you want to homeschool our grandkids? We didn't homeschool you and you turned out just fine. And again, it always goes back to the fact that they just don't understand it. And so the negative people who are usually well-meaning, but they simply just don't get it, those people definitely need to see the movie. And then I'll tell you one of our other audiences that we did not anticipate, they were not anywhere even on our radar, was kids. So when we sent out the movie to our test audience and we got responses back from people, we had a test audience of about 200 people. We shot the movie out to them. We said, okay, give us your feedback. And it was fantastic because we got some really great feedback. But one of the things that we heard from several people who were completely separate from one another, different parts of the country, didn't know each other, came back and said, we watched this as a family and my kids thanked me for homeschooling them after they watched the movie. And we were like, wow, that's incredible that God would use this movie not just to change the hearts of parents and grandparents, but to change the hearts of the kids themselves so that they could understand why their parents have made the decision to homeschool them. And so it really is a movie for everyone. It's been Dove approved for all ages. And the only thing I would say on that is there are a couple of clips in the movie where if you have little ones who are very sensitive to things, I mean, it's definitely not the focus of the movie, but there are some clips of, some like drag queen story hour and a school shooting that actually happened at our niece's high school just a couple of years ago. And so we have some different news clips and stuff of things like that. So if your kids are sensitive to those things or you just don't want them to be exposed to that, then maybe preview the movie first before you show it to them. But definitely for, upper elementary and up, it's a fantastic movie for everyone to watch.
And of course, they would be exposed to those things if they were in government schools without your approval.
Oh, yes. They wouldn't just be exposed to them. They would be encouraged to live by those standards. And so that's definitely not what we want for our kids.
Well, you can find out more about the movie at classicalconversations.com/rocked. But if they don't want to go there, where are some other ways to learn about the movie, to view it, or just find out more about you and your family?
Yeah. So Schoolhouse Rocked, ROCKED, schoolhouserocked.com has all of the information you need. DVDs are out now, so you can purchase the DVD. You can stream the movie. Those are obviously the best two ways to get it. And so whatever way you think is best to watch it, you can do that. Lots of people right now are purchasing several DVDs to hand out to friends and family members. And so that's been really fun. People messaging us and, saying, we just ordered 10 DVDs. We're handing them out at our, homeschool co-op or whatever. And so everything that we have is at schoolhouserocked.com. And then, like I said, I also host the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. And so we bring weekly encouragement for homeschoolers. At the very end of the movie, it says, go to schoolhouserocked.com to download your free homeschool survival kit. And that's a 70+ page document that basically walks parents through how to get started homeschooling, what things you need to know about homeschooling, what are your state laws, all of the details, and then how to do this. And we talk about all those things on the podcast. We have a new podcast that airs each week, 3 times a week, actually. It's a 3-part episode. And so we try to continue to bring the encouragement, just like you are with this podcast as well, to just keep parents involved and encouraged and equipped to do this homeschooling thing.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation today, and thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Robert.
I really enjoyed that conversation. So let's talk about these 15 tools of learning. And remember, there's the 5 core habits of grammar, the 5 common topics of dialectic, and the 5 canons of rhetoric. And when you learn these 15 tools, you can tackle anything that the Lord puts in front of you. So let's see how some of these tools were used in our conversation today. In the 5 core habits of grammar, the repetition that builds knowledge, attending. Yvette showcased attending for us when she described the way that her guests answered their questions. She said she and her husband noticed that passion and conviction of the people they were interviewing, and that they were amazed by how well everything flowed together from one guest to another. In the 5 common topics of dialectic, the questions that develop understanding, let's look at comparison. And I love the way Yvette was able to articulate the comparison between the quality of the traditional school model and homeschooling. Finally, in the 5 canons of rhetoric, the artifact that demonstrates wisdom, we see delivery. Yvette has obviously practiced the art of delivery when it comes to talking about homeschooling. I'm sure that even the process of creating Schoolhouse Rocked helped her hone that skill, and as a result, she was able to communicate her ideas in a clear and convicting way. Next, we will practice those 15 tools of learning and thinking about what's going on in society today. And the topic that we're going to be covering in today's episode and in the next couple episodes is the topic of energy and how we should approach that conversation as classical learners and classical educators and using these 15 tools. So today I really want to talk about what is energy. And of course, that's naming. That's the first of the 5 core habits. And if we don't know what energy is, it's going to be very difficult to have an intelligent conversation about it. And that's what we're trying to do as classical educators. There should be no part of the world, no conversation that we can't be part of because we know how to ask good questions. And so the first thing to do is, what is energy? And, we could go look that up online or in an encyclopedia or dictionary and get an understanding of what that is. Next, we might use the tool of memorization, which is another 5 core habit. And what are some laws of energy? Energy is part of science, and there are laws that govern energy. Of course, we know the Lord designed the world and that there's laws that reflect him. And so we would want to learn those laws of energy. Next, in the 5 common topics of dialectic, we want to define what are some energy sources. And so, of course, you might think of oil, the sun, wind, water, propane, gasoline, which is a derivative of oil. Of course, there's other sources of energy, such as calories that our body uses and burns to keep us going during the day. So what are some of those sources of energy? And then we will want to use the 5 common topics tool of comparison. And so what are some differences between energy sources? How do we collect them? How do we store them? Are they easily stored? And so that will give us a better idea of what energy is out there. And finally, it's great to get this information, but ultimately we want to use the 5 canons of rhetoric to share it with friends or colleagues or our family. So you might think of style or elocution. What are some of the best ways to present what you find? You could do some graphs or some different pictures or put a meme together and post it on your favorite social media site. So these are ways that you can use the 15 tools of learning to think about energy. After this, Will McCreary will give us a segment on cryptocurrency. I've enjoyed Will as he's used the classical approach to describe to us this new technology that many of us don't know a whole lot about. And so I hope you've enjoyed this segment so far. We are using a classical approach to talking about this subject. And so we're going to be changing the name from 5 Minutes of Crypto with Will to Classical Crypto. Of course, that rolls off the tongue a little bit better, but it's going to be the same great content. Before getting on with the show, I want to tell you about the Museum of the Bible. If you haven't been, you have to go. It's a large museum in Washington, D.C., and has traveling exhibits from around the world. And Museum of the Bible brings visitors through interactive, immersive experience using cutting-edge technology to tell the impact, narrative, and history of the scriptures. You'll find a lot that relates to the CC curriculum in there. And great news for our CC families, you can save on tickets. Just log in to CC Connected to find your Museum of the Bible discount code to apply during checkout. Visit www.museumofthebible.org for more information. Now back to the show.
Welcome back to another crypto session. Small change. You all have been so gracious. I've received a lot of great feedback, lots more than I expected. So we're going to continue these segments, but a small change. We're going to change the name of them to Classical Crypto with Will. They will still be 5 minutes or less. This segment is on the history of Ethereum. Now, Bitcoin is the granddaddy of all cryptos at the moment. The second largest market cap to Bitcoin is Ethereum. Today, that market cap sits at almost $400 billion. So close to $500 billion, which is just hard to fathom. But there you go. Ethereum is the leading smart contract cryptocurrency. And a question I keep receiving from the CC community is, talk about NFTs. We want to know more about NFTs. Well, according to Business Insider, 80% of NFTs are built and run on the Ethereum blockchain. That's a little teaser, more on NFTs in the next couple of sessions. Ethereum was conceived by programmer Vitalik Buterin in 2013, but it did not officially launch until July 2015. It is known as a deflationary asset, as in Ethereum is traded, and as the network is utilized, very small portions of the overall market cap are what are called burned or used up. For most of 2015 to 2016, right after its launch, Ethereum traded at between $1 and $15. 6 years later today, each Ethereum token trades between $3,000 and $4,000 per token. That shows how high the demand is for Ethereum, and it just seems to keep increasing year after year. It's absolutely incredible. Okay, here's where I'm going to nerd out on you guys a little bit. Hopefully this doesn't get boring. It'll be kind of quick, but a lot of people want to know, how does Ethereum work? Like, practically, what does a blockchain look like? So here's an example of Ethereum. Ethereum is technically a network of computers. You could also call those computers nodes that build and come to a consensus on an ever-growing series of blocks or batches of transactions. That is known as the Ethereum blockchain. Each block contains an identifier of the chain that must precede it if the block is considered to be valid. Whenever a node or computer adds a new block or a new transaction to its chain, it executes the transactions in the block in the order that they're listed, thereby altering the Ethereum balances on other storage values of Ethereum accounts. So when one block changes, another block changes. If you send me Ethereum, the block that used to list your transaction is going to change. The value is going to change a little bit because you transferred some to me. These balances and values collectively are known as the state, and they're maintained on the nodes separately from the blockchain. Each node communicates with a relatively small subset of the network, its peers. Whenever a node wishes to include a new transaction in the blockchain, it sends a copy of the transactions to each of its peers, who then send a copy of each to their peers, and so on and so forth. The nodes basically just keep the whole network accountable. Certain nodes are called miners. They maintain a list of all new transactions and use them to create new blocks, which they can then use and send out to the rest of the network. Whenever a node receives a block, it checks the validity of that block and all of the transactions therein, and if it finds the block to be valid, adds it to its blockchain and executes all of those transactions. Sorry if that got long. Basically, if you send Ethereum to a friend, computer nodes across the world will verify, validate, and store a record of the redistribution of value, or Ethereum, from your digital wallet to your friend's digital wallet. And this is what is known as a blockchain. There's a lot of accountability there. It's really a beautiful system. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you learned a little bit about the Ethereum blockchain. I'm really looking forward to our next session on NFTs.
I hope you enjoyed episode 6 of Refining Rhetoric. I know I did. Please leave a comment below and share it with a friend who could be encouraged, and be sure to practice those 15 tools of learning in your daily life. God bless and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation. and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.